Oui, allô, Pizza Galassia, j'ai pas le temps, faut faire sur Internet.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 23rd edition of the Neuchâtel International Fantastic Film Festival and to the first day of the Imaging the Future Symposium. So a symposium that looks at digital creation and new technologies in audiovisual productions and also in digital culture. For this next event, we look at video games, as you very well know, with our Ahead of the Game label, which aims to get Swiss and international developers talking about a concept of game or narrative design. I would first like to thank David Javet, for our consultant, for his help, his continued help in organizing today's talks. David Javet, who is the co-founder of the Game Lab in PFL and who will later be moderating the discussion between our guests. So today we'll be talking about wholesome games. These are relatively new but thriving type of game. They show us that gaming can be a comforting experience. But how exactly do we go about creating such an experience? Maybe you have personal experience with the Cosy games, and you know that there are quite a lot of approaches to that. So to explore this subject, we are very pleased to welcome Tabea Iseli, who is CEO and game director at Stardust Studio, and David Wildemann, co-CEO and creative director at Neoludic Games from Germany. Each one of our guests will present their approach on cozy gaming in turn. Each presentation will first include a gameplay of each studio's games, and both will finally be talking with David Javet. So without further ado, please welcome Tabea Iseli on stage.
So, hi everyone. I will be silent during the gameplay, but I just wanted to say hi quickly before I get started. Alrighty, I would say we have 30 seconds left, so that's a perfect time to switch to my presentation. We did our very first quest in Grimoire Groves, and yeah. I've been asked to talk a little bit in between while I get help with my slides. Yeah, Grimoire Groves is a cozy roguelite dungeon crawler about growing plants and friendships. You play as Primrose, a novice witch who will help her senior witch, Lavender, to grow or restore her garden And she, as you might have seen in the dialogue, will also hopefully unravel what is happening to the forest and why there aren't as many sentient plant creatures as there have been before. So, during my talk, I will focus on why we decided to create a roguelite dungeon crawler mixed with a cozy game, and what it means to create a game in an emerging genre such as roguelite dungeon crawlers, such as cozy games. So maybe before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's first start with the question, what are cozy games exactly? Because the answer to that question might not be as easy as we expect. Cozy games are what the name is implying. They are games which are cozy, but depending on who you ask what makes a game cozy, you may get very different answers. The genre is still very new, and thus the definition of the genre is still kind of vague. So as another approach, we could also ask the question, how did the genre emerge? And I would personally say that one of the biggest points for the cozy game genre probably was the release of Animal Crossing: New Horizons back in March 2020. In the game, you are moving to an island, and your task is to bring more inhabitants to your village. So you build your own house, you gather decorations for your home and the whole island. You are collecting bugs and fish and fruits and everything. And in the end, it could be summarized as an island-shaped dollhouse inhabited by cute animals. The game sold over 45 million copies, which is insane by itself, but that's not everything. For many people, the game was an escape from the then ongoing COVID pandemic. During the lockdowns, people could use Animal Crossing as a tool to, go outside, tend to their garden, decorate, talk to virtual neighbors, or even play with their real-life friends. And one very crucial aspect as well is also that Animal Crossing is portraying this almost perfect world. There's no war, there are no enemies to fight, and the biggest problem that you are facing is that you need more people in your village, and this is a problem which is easily solved by just living your life. So during times with many uncertainties in our lives, this kind of cozy world was exactly what many people were looking for. Now, it has to be said that New Horizons wasn't the first ever cozy game. It wasn't even the first ever Animal Crossing. It was the 5th game in the Animal Crossing main series, with the original releasing in 2001. But before 2020 and before New Horizons, people would probably refer to that type of game as either farming sim or life sim. So it can very well be argued that it wasn't Animal Crossing New Horizons which was the game changer, but it can be said that it probably was in the right place at the right time. It not only sold so many copies, it also was the talk of the town, because during the pandemic, everybody would share their Animal Crossing adventures on social media. And through that, cozy games became such a big thing that it couldn't be ignored any longer. This led to two things. On one hand, there was kind of a gold rush for everybody to create their own leave your boring city life behind and become a simple farmer type of game. And by the way, put a pin into that because it will become important later. And secondly, it also became more than just that. Cozy games became a part of a lifestyle. They became a subculture in themselves. Cozy gamers created their own cozy game aesthetics, and they would decorate their home or their gaming setup accordingly. It's not only about what type of games you're playing, it's when and why and how you're doing it. It's sort of like about self-care. It's a ritual. It's like other people are going to the spa. And it's also not just about the games itself, because it just became a greater part of a set of like hobbies and interests. Cozy gamers also like baking and tea and gardening and foraging and knitting and crocheting and all these things. So it's the whole package, you know? It's in a way a way how you take care of yourself in this fast-paced world. And of course, it's not only, you know, a one-way street where, you know, cozy games would become part of a lifestyle. It's also the other way around, that these interests would start to become a part of cozy games. So nowadays, we do have cozy games about, you know, taking picture of cute animals, or about foraging real-life plants, or selling stickers, or as we will see in the next talk, about running your own tiny bookshop. And by the way, I would also like to point out that this had a huge impact on the game industry in itself, because so many people decided that they wanted to become game developers themselves, because with the success of cozy game, with the genre, they finally felt like a game about their interests and their hobbies could actually work and could actually find an audience. And especially in an industry which is kind of dominated by a certain set of people, and arguably sometimes also a little bit a narrow set of topics, that's a very welcome change. And by the way, also put a pin into that, because this topic will also become important later. But let's switch topics. So far I mostly talked about, you know, what cozy games are, but how do we, as a game studio, how does Grimoire Groves fit into the picture? Well, funny enough, Grimoire Groves started out roughly at the same time as New Horizons, a few months later, to be precise, in summer 2020. And the most intriguing part for us as a studio was that finally a specific set of players had to be taken seriously. Because, you know, for decades, hardcore gamers, and sometimes, sadly, also the industry would look down on other gamers because, like, if you don't like super challenging games, then you're not a real player. If you don't like competitive games, then you're not a real gamer. And of course, if you are a girl, then of course you're definitely not a gamer. And that type of audience was sick and tired of this treatment. And back at the time, forums like Our Girl Gamers on Reddit were full of people basically begging the industry to finally see them as a real, serious audience, and also an audience worth catering for. So we as Stardust, we wanted to be at the forefront of this change, and we wanted to create a game for exactly these people. And with the success of games like Animal Crossing New Horizons, we felt like now we suddenly would have the change to also convince an investor of that. Because that's also a really important point, and we quickly need to do an excursion into how indie game development works. So usually you, as a studio, you have an idea, and you need some time to work on this idea to bring it to life, right? But unfortunately, usually you don't have like 3 years where you can work on the game full-time without any other income. So you need an investor or a publisher. Now, the indie game industry is full of publishers that will help you with the funding of your development, that will help you with distribution and marketing, and in return, they will take a part of your game's earnings. Of course, you first have like to convince them that you will make them rich. So you usually create a prototype, and in the best case scenario, you already have some people who are really interested in your game. And the publisher then in turn will try to figure out how much money they can make with your game. And based on that, they may or may not offer you an agreement. But since nobody can see into the future, the part of figuring out what potential a game has usually is based on, you know, what's already out there on the market and is already selling hundreds and thousands of copies and is, you know, like super successful. And this in turn can lead sometimes to a kind of vicious cycle where publishers would fund the same type, the very similar, you like always the same games over and over and over again. And this is our third and last pin, I promise. And we will, also get into why they are important later. But first, let's go back to our case. So with the success of Cosy Games, we felt like now would be the time to convince a publisher that now is the right time to invest into innovative stuff for the Cozy Gamer audience. And we had like this 5-step plan how we want to do this. The first point was that we noticed that a lot of players from underrepresented groups were super passionate gamers, but there were like some points they kind of got tired of. For example, a lot of them really loved Breath of the Wild, which is, I guess, kind of a traditional RPG, but for once it wasn't like this dark and gritty war-ridden world, but it was, for the most part, a very luscious, colorful and vibrant world, and they really liked that. We also noticed that players got tired of fighting things all the time. To stay with our Breath of the Wild example, some people just started asking questions like, okay, but there are so many cute animals in this game, and why is the only thing I can do with them killing them and cooking them into food? Why can't we just, be nice and befriend them, So we decided that we wanted to do a non-violent game about friendship. Then we also wanted to engage with players as early as possible to make them feel heard. And while we wanted to create a game for the Cozy audience, we didn't want to create a game that is too classical farming or life sim, because we expected many studios to do exactly this, and that this might lead to an oversaturation of the market after a few years. Instead, we rather wanted to work towards our first point and take something that is proven on the market, but then taking it and putting it into a setting and like a vibe that would have an appeal to our audience. So I don't want to bore you too much longer about market research and strategies and stuff. Shortly summarized, we evaluated many points and we came to the conclusion that a roguelite dungeon crawler set in a cozy world would be a perfect combination. So we went on our merry ways and we started to work on the project. And actually, even in the first few weeks, we already started to reach out to our audience. We did things like asking them what art style they would like to see in the game. We involved them in the development of our main characters. We talked to them about our magic system, about what kind of things they would like to collect in the game, and much, much more. So after roughly a year of development, which was part-time next to another project, we had our first kind of presentable prototype and already a lot of people who were interested in the game. And in the meantime, Cozy Games only had become bigger and bigger. Kickstarter, for example, was absolutely full of farming games, and fans would fund every single one of them. Plus, 2021 was also a huge year for Cozy Games in general. A lot of now super successful Cozy Games were either announced or released in 2021. I put some together for you on this slide. If you don't know every one of them, don't worry. The summary is it was a huge year, and we thought that publishers should finally start to pick up on that trend, which in turn would also make it easier for us to land the deal. But unfortunately, unlike New Horizons, it didn't seem like we were in the right place at the right time, and we had several issues, and some of them have to do with the pins that we collected during the talk. It's like a game, you collect stuff. So the first issue that we were facing was the last pin that we collected. And it's the one about publisher funding games, which are very similar to already super successful ones. And that had an impact which was twofold. On one hand, publishers were still very reluctant to pick up Cozy Games. While the genre was super successful, it also was very new. And new things in general are riskier because you have less experience, obviously. And on the other hand, there was a subtype of cozy games where there were tons of games that you can do your market research on, and those are farming sims. So a lot of cozy games that did see substantial funding were very traditional farming games. Then we also had pin number 2, which is new people getting into the industry, and you're probably like, wait, you said that's an amazing thing, and yes, it is, I really love that. But for us, at the same time, it also meant that we, as a 4-people studio from Switzerland, with our badly but still, Swiss salaries, had to compete with hobby devs who were creating their game in their free time and thus had very low funding requirements. So, summarized, we were not able to kind of offset this additional financial risk for investors with either our professional experience, for example, or the traction that we were able to gather with the game already. And last but not least, besides these external factors, we also had one big elephant in the room, and which was, and to a certain extent still is, the biggest challenge with Grimoire Groves. So, as I said earlier, we decided that we want to make the game non-violent. And when we made this decision, we knew that this would be a kind of a challenge, but oh boy, did we underestimate that. Because, as it turns out, violence and killing things just is so much fun. Don't tell this to people who hate video games, but I have to, I'm creating a non-violent game, and I have to admit that it's sadly true. First and foremost, killing things just is very easily understandable, and it's also a very simple solution to a conflict. Because if we say, we disagree on a point, and then we just, hit each other, and I kill you, and, there's one clear winner, that's me, and I don't have to settle for any compromise, and as a cherry on top, I get the clear signs that I obviously was better and smarter and stronger than you, so I get these warm and fuzzy feelings inside. Secondly, it's also about what we are used to as players, because if you pick up a game and there are baddies to be slain, I don't have to explain to you why and how you have to do this. You already know through all the games that you have played before, regardless if super new or super old, regardless of if it's Space Invaders or Minecraft or Fortnite or whatever. Last but not least, if you create games, it's always nice if you can have a look at other games and at how they solve certain problems or how they are communicating their mechanics. And then you can just copy everything or learn from it. And especially when it comes to how to make combat feel really nice and juicy, there are so many resources that you can learn from. How to create non-violent action gameplay, however, well, good luck finding these resources. I made a whole talk about this topic at the Roguelite Celebration Festival back in 2022, so if that's something you're interested in, the talk is available on YouTube for free with shitty audio quality, but, anyways. So, yes. We only have some minutes left, so let's do a little time skip. Shortly summarized, for around 2.5 years now, our development was a constant struggle between finding funding, solving our design challenges, and at the same time, getting in enough progress to not have the game be stuck in development hell. In the end, or at least where we are standing now, I feel like we're in a good place. After all, we finally did find an investor, which is wonderful, and we love to work with them. And since we are now able to work on the game full-time, there was so much work that we can do, and everything got so much easier. We still have some months left before we release, but we're quite confident because we can see how much progress we were able to get in the past few years. And after all, maybe we will still be in the right place at the right time. Because, of course, the development and shaping of the cozy game genre did not stop in the last 2.5 years. And now we can finally unravel the mystery of our last pin, which was the pin about the gold rush, which happened after the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, especially for farming games. So At first, fans were super excited because after years where they only would get a decent farming game every now and then, suddenly they were sprouting literally everywhere. But players also started to notice that not all of these games have the same level of quality. And while most of them are super wonderful and genuine products, a gold rush also means that usually there are some bad apples in between who just want to, make some money and they don't really care about creating a good game. So I would say, especially for like 6 months to a year now, cozy gamers have become quite wary of like bad quality games, and also like they are looking for new things. And that doesn't mean that this is the end of the era of cozy games. In contrary, I think cozy games are finally doing what I hoped they would do. They grow and they evolved. After a bunch of years where players could farm to their heart's content, some of them now are looking for different games with different mechanics, but still the same cute and cozy vibes. And this led to very interesting cases such as cozy space survivors, which, if you ask people, are survival game cozy? But it seems to work out. And my personal favorite example is Haunted Paws, a cozy horror game about two dogs who are trying to rescue their human from a haunted mansion. So I personally love to see that change, and I really welcome it. And I love to see the genre kind of growing up. And after all, maybe next year when we will launch Grimoire Groves, a roguelike dungeon crawler about growing plants and friendships will be exactly what people are looking for. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tabea, for this very generous presentation. Now we welcome David Wildemann for his presentation. David Wildemann is co-CEO and creative director at Neoludic Game in Germany. And I was already introduced, but I'm David Javet. I'll be moderating the discussion afterwards. So thank you very much, David, for being with us. You can already draft your questions, prepare your question. We're going to have some time after the presentation, of course, to hear about also your feedbacks or your various questions on the topic. Okay, good. Thank you very much again, David.
It's great to be here. It's really exciting. Yes. So now comes the part where I play the game in silence for 10 minutes, but it hopefully speaks for itself quite nicely. Yeah, let me bridge the gap a little bit. The game is called Tiny Bookshop, in which you run a tiny bookshop, which you can see here on screen. And now I will zip up. Oh, sorry. think this is where we stop playing the demo and head on over to the talk. So as you can see, Tiny Bookshop is pretty much what it says on the cover. It is a game about running a tiny bookshop in a small seaside town. Honestly, much like Neuchâtel, if you think about it. It might look a bit familiar. And yeah, today I'll talk about sort of the thoughts and ideas behind the game, why we made it, and why I think it's pretty neat to make a game like this, and how that relates to cozy games and the games we'll hopefully see more of in the future. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yes, the title of the talk is Tiny Bookshop and the Fantasies We Aren't Playing Yet. As a little test run, I'd like to hear how many of you in the audience are game developers? Do we have any game developers here? Nice, very cool, very cool. How many of you are players, are gamers? Damn, that's pretty neat. Yeah, most of you. That's great. That's great. Yeah, David has already introduced me, so I'll jump over the slide just briefly. I'm a game developer from Cologne. I'm a game designer mostly on this project. I'm also the creative director. Before that, we've worked with museums on cool experimental things, so it kind of made sense for us to experiment with something in the cozy scene next. So, and that is Tiny Bookshop, our silly little indie game about which, yeah. So let's talk about games. And for this talk, we're going to use a lens to look at games. This is not the definitive way of looking at them. It's just one way we can look into them. And I think a neat starting point for looking into games is thinking about what makes them special, what makes them distinct in some regards. And now I'm going to hit you with a bit of a brick, an academic brick by Jesper Juhl. He's not like, again, keep in mind, this is not the definition, this is a definition. But Juhl defines games as rule-based formal systems with variable and quantifiable outcomes, where the outcomes are assigned different values, and players exert effort to change that outcome. The player then feels attached to the outcome, and the consequence of the activity is optional and negotiable. So in short, games are rule-based, they react to players, they have different outcomes depending on the effort players exert, and the player obviously feels attached to that outcome. That game makes games pretty cool to create responsive worlds and responsive systems. They allow us to tinker with things, explore things in motion. Like we can give an input and the system provides an output to that. So we enter a conversation with the game, and it allows us to immerse in different topics, in fantasies and our interests really neatly. Tabea has already shown like the be-all, end-all game, of course, in recent history. This is Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. But yeah, it's a great example of this sort of sandbox nature of games that allows you to do something, and then there's a response to the things you're doing. So we've already touched on this a little bit, but there's some fantasies and some interests games have been really, really great at showing and representing in them. And there are some that games have been a little bit neglectful of, historically speaking. And I'll do a little bit of an experiment now with you. Can anyone tell me what game this is from? Yes, it's Modern Warfare 2, Call of Duty. Oh, sorry. Call of Duty. And I think it's very interesting to, I've never held a gun. I don't intend to hold a gun in my life, but it's something that is very present in video games and something very present in the media I've consumed as a kid growing up. Whereas, can anyone tell me what this is? Yes, those are different trombones. But yeah, it's like very disconnected from games somehow, despite being a little closer to my lived reality on this earth. But it's very interesting to think about how normal one of these types of object is in games and how exponentially less normal the other type of object is. Are you familiar with the concept of the Roman Empire, not in the literal actual thing, but like this idea that if you prompt someone, a man usually is the example, and ask them, what do you think about the Roman Empire? They usually have a hot take on the subject. So I'm wondering if you guys have any Roman empires, anything that you care so deeply about that I can just ask you and you have a pretty nice hot take on that subject. Anyone? Anyone have a Roman Empire? It can also be the literal Roman Empire. Yeah, nice, very nice. Anyone else? All right, then I'll just do me. My Roman Empire for a while was van life and like living tiny and all of those things. So after high school, before studying, before doing anything, I bought a little camper van and traveled through southern France and the Loire Valley with my partner in this little camper van we lovingly called Rusty. Because it was always broken down, it was always leaking. So it's perhaps not surprising that from this special interest, when I saw this little tiny library in New Zealand, after having studied game development, I was like, that's it. Honestly, I'd much rather do this than be a game developer. But being a game developer, it immediately started working in me, and I immediately started thinking about, okay, how would I do this? What would be the mechanics at play? And that the same day turned into a card game prototype that I saw this bookshop that you can see here. These, at the bottom here, these are the book boxes we bought in the newspaper earlier. So they're still there. And then up there, there's the concert, which is a location in the game. So that is even made it over into the game. So let's talk about this tiny bookshop some more as an example of a special interest manifested into game form. And while I'm talking about our journey, I'll show you the old trailer we had for Tiny Bookshop. So this is Raven Rush. He's my co-founder, and we started working on Tiny Bookshop together in uni still. And this is the very first prototype we've made digitally in 2019, in 3 months for our bachelor thesis. So it's very, it's like similar, but it's like the first draft of what would become Tiny Bookshop. And so we did that, and then we said, okay, we'd really like to do this some more. This was really fun. And similar to Tabea, we started a company and tried to get funding, which was, was difficult in 2019, 2020, 2021, but then it started getting easier, and we made a prototype that, with the help of government grants, and we were sort of able to spin this game into something more real. It became real for us, and we took part, sort of on a whim, in 2022 in a little indie games competition that was called Indie Cup Germany, and I submitted the game, and then I got really insecure about having submitted it, so I didn't want to complete the submission. And then they reached out to me and were like, hey, this looks cute, please finish your submission. And we finished the submission, and we ended up winning that award, which meant that we got a booth at the EGX in London, hosted by Chucklefish. And then we were like, okay, I guess we should probably launch a Steam page for the game so people can like wishlist it or something, or like have a way of tracking us down in like 3 years when the game is done. So we did that, and we thought we'd soft launch a Steam page. If you're a game developer in the audience, don't soft launch your Steam page. That's a very bad idea. It doesn't work. It's pretty important that you get this right. Like, it's the first announcement of your game. But we thought we can soft launch the Steam page, and pretty immediately, Wholesome Games stole our trailer, which we hadn't uploaded anywhere else, and they started reposting it everywhere else. And people got pretty excited about this silly little game that we were making. So let's go over to the next slide. Yeah, and since then, like, Tiny Bookshop has built a little audience. People have reacted very favorably to it, and they were really excited about this. This idea of running a little bookshop in a game, like, we are the first bookshop game. I think that's pretty surprising to me, seeing that bookshops are pretty normal in normal life, and lots of people like bookshops and like the fantasy of running a bookshop and being inside a bookshop. But somehow I ended up designing the first BOOKSHOP game, and people were really excited about it. And they still are, hopefully, when the game comes out next year. But yeah, it's been a really nice journey, and for me it's been a process of realizing that people share these fantasies even though you don't necessarily think that gaming goes along with liking books or bookshops. But I think games are so much more, and gaming is so wider nowadays that it's like sort of reductive to think of them as a disconnected interest. People are a variety of different tastes and feelings and stuff like that, so they have these, yeah, there's much more variety in gaming. So where does that all fit in? How does that connect to cozy gaming in general? So Tabea also provided a little definition of cozy games, and I think I can only speak to me as a designer what I think about, what my design intentions are when designing cozy games. But I want to explore something that is fundamentally empathetic and kind in the widest sense of the word, that encourages like people to be kind to each other, but also kind to themselves, and they feel that there's like this kindness in the product they're consuming, because will make it cozy in the end. And I think that extends beyond game development itself, that extends to how we treat the community we're interacting with, how we present ourselves in the public forum that is Twitter or Steam. And I think that is, it's something that games have historically not seemed like, right? Like we all remember Gamergate, probably games, and the gamer scene is pretty scary sometimes. And I think this kindness model is a nice counter-proposal to, I think, what I would like gaming culture to look like a bit more. So Tabea also talked about it a little bit. Is cozy a trend? And I think there's like a really naturally, this question is very natural, right? Because obviously there's a lot more cozy games now and self-identifying cozy games and cozy players. But I think fundamentally it's a sign of a maturing medium and maturing audiences. I think there's a lot more people out there enjoying games. I brought you here a little statistics from the Gameverband, which is the German games media Verband, and that was from 2022, I think, 2021. And the gender split is quite interesting, right? It's basically 50-50, and the average gaming age is also much higher than you'd expect, right? Like a lot more people are playing games, and I think are bringing their life experiences, their desires, their dreams, their hopes, their fears into the things they're enjoying as a hobby. And I think it's very natural that people crave a more varied subjects in their games. And I think that's where we, with Tiny Bookshop, sort of hit into like this niche here, that people didn't see a game like this exist before, and now we're making one. And I think this is a fantastic design lens to look at things, where it's what do I deeply care about and what might other people deeply care about that just isn't explored in games yet. And I think that's really fun, and we'll see a lot of cool, creative ideas coming up in the future about games. Yeah, so as a big takeaway, if you want to take away one thing from this tiny talk, is that it's a maturing medium, and I think players are diverse, connected, and a very broad spectrum of our society, a broad representation of our society. And I want to leave you. I set up Chekhov's trombone here. So I want to leave you with this little nugget of a game as an outlook of what we're missing, what we've been missing all these years in games. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for this very generous presentation. Tabea, can you join us again here? And maybe, David, you could sit here. So you'll be surrounded by Davids.
Yes, oh no.
And we still have 30 minutes. We'll take questions, of course, afterward. But let's first try to have like a cozy discussion about cozy gaming, wholesome gaming, your games, of course, but also your approach to game design and what you're trying to express through your game. So first, thank you for these very interesting presentation. It was very nice to hear you and see how both your talks connected and also complemented each other. You said in your presentation, David, and I think I also heard that in yours, that I do think that empathy, the idea of empathy, is really at the core of cozy game design, if I might say. The sort of using the language of video games or the language of game that is kind of a language of interacting with system or with ecosystems to sort of foster the pleasure it is to care for the needs of others and also to care for ourselves. Can you maybe, react with that sort of empathy is at the core of your designs? And also, can you give us maybe specific examples, for example, in terms of UX or UI or game design, about where you're trying to sort of foster that empathy in players?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that is less easy to represent with numbers. In general, like empathy as a game mechanic is sort of more expensive and harder to do than number go up or move faster, avoid an obstacle. So for us, we're doing a shop simulation game, essentially, right? And there's many crossroads where we could go with, okay, this just makes you earn more money per book, or this makes your book stock increase, or like eventually you turn into this Jeff Bezos Amazon type character, which would be a natural evolution sort of the shop game genre, right? And we're very confident in not doing that. Like we really want to avoid going down this road. And so we have to counteract, of course, players focusing on numbers too much, because numbers make it easy to abstract away things. And we really want them to focus on the people in the community that they're part of. So that is for us introducing more and more narrative elements into a shop sim game, which is not usual and which like threw off a lot of publishers because they were like, but what is the evolution of the game? And we're like, you get to meet people, you get to become part of their life, you get to learn their stories, and you get to care for this community you're a part of. And I think that's more expensive, of course. We need writers, we need good writing, but it's also much more rewarding on a person-to-person level, I think. So that's something we've tried to go for in Tiny Bookshop.
Okay, and Tabea, also in terms of resources, I mean, you're making a dungeon crawler that is a lot about, right, gathering resources.
Yeah.
And I've seen in your playtest that you can compost things, right? You can recycle the resources you gather. So is it also like a mechanic that you're trying to explore also?
I mean, for us, like one really important aspect of the development of the game was the compost kind of is like a traditional resource in a roguelite dungeon crawler where you would collect like money, and in our game you collect compost. But for us, an important aspect was to kind of take that roguelite dungeon crawler genre, which is famous for you failing over and over again because you're going into the dungeon and then you die and you come back and then you go in and die again and come back in like a traditional dungeon crawler setting, and kind of taking this and putting it into a setting where we can like empathize how kind of normal it should be to have like this baby steps approach to life, and not be like, I mean, if you're a dungeon crawler player, it's kind of normal that you fail and you go back, and you're in most cases you're not, I failed again. And that's one thing that we really like about the genre, and that we also wanted to embrace in this like empathy context, and telling people like, hey, it's okay to fail. Just try to make like baby steps. So this is kind of the coming from a traditional game mechanics, but something that we try to empathize through our story and our game to also kind of actually get to a message that should make you feel accepted, you know, as a human being. So yeah, it's kind of like the whole thing with resources and compose and everything kind of we're trying to make you feel good about yourself and kind of the way you are approaching a game.
Yeah, and on that topic, I mean, this panel is called That Cozy Feeling. So, I mean, playtesting is such a core part of game design. So how do you playtest? How do you playtest a game where you're trying to bring coziness out of people, or to produce coziness or a cozy feeling? Or do you have like a specific approach to your playtesting sessions, or?
I think that's, for me at least, it's very like designing any other game where you sit down and you present the game to the players and then you observe them. It's just different things I look out for. Like Tiny Bookshop is not a game of reflexes. So there's less timing and like motor skills involved, which I quite enjoy. The playtest sessions are longer. Tiny Bookshop is a very slow game. Like I played for 10 minutes. We didn't get to the second day. So playtesters have to bring a lot of time. And I have to be very careful to playtest it with the right players. Because with like a roguelike or with like a more established game mechanic, it's very easy to, I think, pick players to test it on. And like you'll probably conflict with the visuals and like with the vibe more. But for us, like we know it's super critical that someone who likes this fantasy and who likes slower games plays it. Otherwise, their feedback will also not be super useful. Like we learned that when reaching out to publishers, there was often a pretty big gender divide, if I'm honest, whether or not they liked the game or who on the team liked the game. Like the more junior people, usually the women on the team really liked it. They were really like, damn, we have to get this signed. And then the more, the more senior people, the people that actually ended up making the decision were always like, I don't get it. I don't think this works. Like, what do I do? And you kind of not do that much, and that's the point.
It was exactly the same for us, by the way.
Nice, okay. I'm glad that this is a universal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it feels like game is a lot about having someone else do something, right? So there's a paradox where most of the time we feel that video games should be about giving us a lot of things to do and sort of overloading us with monsters to kill or weapons to collect or quests to do, quest lines. And it feels like video games is a lot about, especially blockbuster games, a lot about overproducing, overgiving, giving loads and loads of things, a huge map to explore and such. And it's interesting to see this cozy genre sort of rise in that, especially as you said during the pandemic, where it's a lot about, okay, we are going to give you things to do, but there's also a dimension about rhythm, right? It's what we are giving you and at what rhythm, right? Because you mentioned Stardew Valley, and at least for me, in my experience, it was a very stressful game.
Yes.
It was the opposite of cozy gaming for me, because I knew that if I wanted to grow that vegetable, I needed to plant it on that day, and if not, I would not get enough money. So it sort of says a lot about also my relationship with games. So is it also, I mean, especially with you with your game Grimoire Grove, that is trying to sort of manage the in-between of a genre that is very frenetic, very skill-based, and just trying to bring it inside the sort of game design sphere.
For us, like one of the biggest challenges was to balance the amount of story that we have in the game, because a lot of roguelike dungeon crawlers are just like, they don't have any story at all, or it's like a story that can be told in a sentence. You are a wizard, you have to win a tournament, go and defeat the final wizard or whatever. period. And for us, we realized in playtesting, by the way, that our audience, well, first of all, we had an issue with, like, if you have to kill things in games, like I said in my talk, you don't have to explain why. But we had so many people who are like, why should you help these plant creatures in your game? And we were like, because it's nice. So we, first of all, realized that we had to do a lot more explaining to why you should play this game and why you should, like, in the story, do these kind of things. And on the other hand, we also realized that our audience wants to have so much more story. So we are still kind of trying to figure out what's the right balance between dialogues, which is something that the Cosy crowd enjoys, and action gameplay, which is what the roguelite crowd enjoys. Because we have seen so many people who would just read all these dialogue and really smile and laugh, and it's also something that we poured a lot of our hearts into to create these characters that feel alive and that are endearing in a way, and still trying to balance it with the more action parts where people are used to just, I'm going to skip all these dialogues, whatever, I just want to go and kill things. So yeah, that's been one of the biggest challenges for us.
Yeah, it feels like narrative design is really also at the core of all this, is also to write characters that are more diverse, but also that express a lot their feelings, and you're trying also through the text you're writing to show the players that it is also a game about emotions, about being glad, about helping each other, about being happy to help each other. And it sort of goes back to what you were saying with Tiny Bookshop. I mean, it's also felt that in the playtest that very quickly you have a discussion with someone. And also, in both your playtests, very quickly we see a senior citizen, I mean, a senior. I mean, is it also a sort of conscious decision to also have sort of main characters, but also diverse, not only, of course, in gender, but also in age?
Yeah, for us, for sure. Like, we wanted to have this wider range of human experience in the game. And we also don't want to have just one type of an experience. Like, we have multiple senior citizen characters in the game, because I think that's part of community. It's just the diversity of experience, right? Like, if we show too much of a homogeneous experience, community or people, it will not feel like a community. I think it starts feeling like community when there's a multi-generational knowledge sharing and things like that going on. And you, of course, have to help them as well. Like, it's a give and take sort of across, like, all the age ranges we can include in the game. So that's, yeah, we're really excited to explore that.
And with GRIMOIRE GROVES, we also have like a...
Yeah, for us, it was a really conscious decision, because we kind of, as a studio, have the ambition that we want to talk about topics that are important to us, but at the same time, for GRIMOIRE GROVES, we wanted to create a game that, you know, makes you feel good. So it should be an uplifting game. So we had a lot of talks about, you know, what are the politics of GRIMOIRE GROVES and how do we present them? Because our first title, Ava, was also very political, and it was more of a, like, you know, showing, like, the negative side of the topic we were talking about. And with GRIMOIRE GROVES, we wanted to go in a different direction. So for us, it was a lot about showing a world and, like, a community as we would like to see one in real life. So in GRIMOIRE GROVES, diversity and like the community and everybody working together from all different backgrounds is just a given, and that's how the world is built, and that's a very conscious decision, and also a part where we were able to really engage the community, where they would talk about what kind of characters they would like to see in the game, and we had a lot of feedback about, hey, can we have this type of character? Can we have like a trans character? Can we have like a boy character? Everything, and where we were able to we were not able to fulfill every wish, but still it's a way how to let our players actually help us shape the game.
Yeah. What you were saying is, it felt like, at least to me, that with Ava, your first game, you were more going in the direction that it could be called like sort of the dystopia
Yes.
imaginary, right?
Yeah.
And it feels to me that cozy gaming is a lot about exploring utopia, right? Exploring ways to, self-care, community, and new ways. I mean, it should not be new ways, but I mean other ways than just presenting a world collapsing, right? But it's sort of promoting solutions or ways to...
We already have a world that is collapsing, so I don't need to spend my time in another fictional world that is collapsing. You know, that was kind of...
All right.
Yeah, but
People are clapping.
that actually was an intentional design decision that we made during the multi-crisis, that we wanted to show a world where you actually would like to spend your time.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people, writers in science fiction would agree with you that sort of dystopia, the dystopian imaginary failed in the way that we are in the dystopia, right? We are in the dystopia that people are trying to sort of prevent us for the 80s, and now there's the need for utopia. So do you actually consciously sort of connect with that sort of mission? I mean, we can see that in science fiction literature and also movies, that sort of authors are sort of actually sort of promoting this sort of type of approach, or do you feel that you're sort of connecting with that movement?
So I really like solar punk just personally.
Yeah, right.
And
Solar
like
punk, I would say.
A Song for the Wild Build is one of my favorite books. With Tiny Bookshop, we wanted to explore this modest utopia as a proposal for how things could be, in the small ways that you can change them.
Yeah,
I think that is, because big utopias also sometimes struggle from this. So many things have to change for this to be believable, right? And we wanted something that feels like, okay, the place where it's rooted in should feel like, okay, I could step outside this door and I'm there.
Right.
But then the things you do should feel like you're making meaningful changes and you're bringing about sort of a utopia around you.
Right. It's a lot about starting with the small things, right? And it's a lot of sort of small things that would bring change, I think.
Yeah.
So I think it's just tiny bookshops, like having like this sort of, small thing you can actually do.
Yeah, but you will not fix the climate crisis in Tiny Bookshop. I'm sorry to say this is beyond the scope of it, but you will, I think, care for the people around you and become part of a community that is nice to each other, and that is, and you of course run a business, right? But you don't run a business as a value extraction business, right? You're not extracting value from this community and from the authors, but I think there's not a zero-sum economy going on in Tiny Bookshop, but it is one that is, you provide a service and people provide a service back, and you both become richer in the equation, sort of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you, Tabea, do you actually connect with these, for example, authors like Becky Chambers, or?
I mean, like, I do very much connect with that idea. For me personally, it was like a transition from when I was younger. I really loved this kind of thrilling and dramatic worlds, such as Game of Thrones and House of Cards and stuff like that. And I would really, binge through that stuff. And now I'm personally in a situation where I just want to go home, watch some really stupid K-dramas or like teenage dramas, and just like, because it's a place for me where I can just shut out the world, and it's just these are places with very overseeable problems,
right.
and I can see like a shift in myself, and I don't really, I don't really know why it's happening. I just realize that it's happening, and thus I'm kind of like, I'm welcoming that in my personal life, but also kind of in a professional way, where I really like, I like the dystopian stuff, and it's important. But we talked a lot about diversity also in terms of what kind of things you create, and I really welcome that we see a lot more different topics and different kind of views that are now more and more are also kind of accepted.
Right.
Great,
thank you. We have 10 minutes, around 10 minutes for questions. So do we have some? I mean, I know that I still have a lot of questions to ask. Yes, we have one here. Eric, thank you, Eric.
So thank you so much for your presentations. I was wondering, you talk about many aspects of your games, but I was wondering what you thought and how you think about sound and music to create these cozy, atmospheric feelings?
So yeah, for us, and by the way, sorry for sponsoring involuntarily the soundtrack of our talks. That was the main menu loop of our game. Especially in terms of sound design, there was a lot of things that we had to learn because, as I talked about, like our challenges to actually explain what is happening in the game because we are not a traditional fighting game. A lot of things become so much more important. So also sound effects were something, there are a lot of positive sound effects in games, but it was still kind of a challenge to find the right world to let players understand what is happening around them. And this, for us, was so much more of a challenge that it would have been if we would have created a traditional game. So it was a lot about trying out different things, looking at what is the most satisfying sound in a game out there. So funny enough, we looked at games like Vampire Survivors because this is one of the games that is just doing such a good job in making you feel good through many different things, even though it doesn't look like a super polished, Blizzard game. So yeah, that was very important to us. And I think for GRIMOIRE GROVES, the sound is much more important to our gameplay and for players to understand what is going on than for other games. Yeah, personally, I would say that.
Yeah. And there's also something with colors, right? You're also using colors that we're not accustomed to, or is it only me? It feels like there's a lot of violet or...
Yeah, it's interesting in that regard because I'm talking a lot about dark and gritty worlds, and on one hand that's like a stylistic choice, but on the other hand it's also a choice because if you have a dark world like we are having in this room, like we have a lot of darkness and then we're trying to highlight an important things by putting light there so you can see it. So in a lot of games you have a lot of darkness, so you actually know where you have to focus on. And we wanted to create a colorful, vibrant world, so it's sometimes so much harder to kind of point out the important things because everything is already beautiful and colorful. And so how, if everything is already super busy, how can you make things stand out from them, which is so much easier if you just have a black background, basically.
And David, maybe something about sort of art direction or sound design in Tiny Bookshop? Or was that like a sort of a big challenge?
Yeah, it's not an unusually, I don't think, for us at least, making a cozy game was not different from making other games we've made before. I'll say we're always trying to bring the handmadeness back into the computer. And that goes for the art style we've chosen. Like we've looked at a lot of old children's illustration books, and Raven, my co-founder, he's a great painter, and he's also a musician. And so we really enjoyed the process, me on the technical side, making sure his painting style can translate over, and his Foley work could translate over. And for the sounds, he actually did a lot of pen and paper work, like a lot of using a filled marker and rubbing it over paper, or putting finger in his mouth and doing the for the sound effects. So we for all the UI sounds and stuff, we really wanted to have that materiality come through.
Something organic, right?
Yeah, organic, or you actually go through a thrift shop, basically. It should feel the diegesis sort of. We don't want the game to sound like it would sound in real life, but there should be an abstraction and a stylization through the texture of the materials we're using. So that's been the process for the sound design, and for the music, we really like the lo-fi gameplay, and we try to bring in I don't think you could hear the music that well, but in theory, it is lo-fi adjacent. There also the texture or the materiality of the sound is coming through, and it's this relaxed jazz sort of vibe going on. So we really want to feel it there's human hand touching the game, right? It's not, it's not super clean. Like there's imperfections in it, and I think that's very nice, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question? Maybe from the, yes, thank you. Merci, Eric.
First of all, thank you for your games. And I already had wishlist them before, and now I'm even more impatient to play them. So, thank you. And for my question, is more direct for the Tiny Bookshop. You say you think it's probably the first game where you play owning a bookshop, and I think probably the first I saw, but I'm very surprised because since several years now, there are a lot of literature about someone who starts a bookshop or inherits a bookshop and start a new life with books, and there's all a genre now for that. And I'm surprised that it's made so much time before coming to video games. So do you have maybe an idea what it didn't work as well or so lately for video games?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I don't know the answer. I can just tell you how hard it was to secure funding to make a bookshop game. It was really hard, and I imagine like if someone else tried to get it done with like a bigger team that paid themselves a better salary, I think it's really hard to be the first in something, like Tabea said, where you can't point to another game that sort of takes the risk out of it. Just like from the economics of the games industry, I think a proven concept is always easier to get more of. And I think something that hasn't shown up yet is always harder to justify. And I think that's happened with Tiny Bookshop, and that will happen with a lot of the games, like I think would be really cool to see, like a lot of the other fantasies out there that games don't really show yet. It's going to be pretty tricky to convince people with money to give you money for them. But yeah, I think that's one explanation for sure. And then the other is maybe that books are having a revival, sort of, like Book Talk is big on TikTok, and like people are taking books more serious again, sort of as a hobby and an interest, right? So I think there's that component to it, that like people making it part of their identity more and more, and they're like referencing each other about books. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, right? It's weird.
Do you think maybe it's, as you said a little bit, maybe the gaming industry is still a little young, it's maturing, but not completely, and opposite to other industries of cultural industries and like that, they don't look so much what others do. Because, for example, in movies or like that, they say, oh, this kind of games or this kind of books or this kind of comics are having success, so maybe we can make a movie about that. And maybe the game industry is still so focused on themselves yet, and they don't look for inspiration enough about what other people like, what people like outside of games, and to inspire. As you say, that people like not only games, like many things, and all these connect, and maybe, the big ones in the industry will finally learn that, okay, gamers are not only gamers. And yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. I'm curious if that is because it's still a young industry, or because it's like we have this sort of gap of like mid-sized game production. Like we have a lot of like tiny indies like Tabea and I, and we have like these massive multinational corporations where like the risk of trying something new, even if it's proven in other genres, might be too big for them to justify spending like €500 million to like work on it, right? Like
I would also say that we kind of have a different situation in terms of expectations towards the media itself. If I look at film, and I'm very aware of speaking at the film festival as not a film professional, so please take it with a grain of salt. But in movies and TV shows, I see a lot more of like openness towards creating something because it's nice or important or fun, and not always with like the expectation that it needs to do super well financially. Whereas at least in Switzerland, and I would suggest that it's probably also a little bit like that internationally, it's really hard to get people who are willing to fund your product if it's not made with like the financial aspect in mind, and like trying to get something that's getting as much money as possible out of it. And that also kind of leads to a situation where we see more of the same and not a lot of new and innovative stuff.
Which make it even harder, because your games are trying to promote another kind of economy, right? Another kind of ways to interact with the system and with an economy, but then still you are inside the video game industry that is, as you said, very sort of focused on productivity and such. Do we have time for one final question? Eric tells me no. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing everything with us. Thank you for listening. And of course, at least for me, I'm very much looking forward about the release of your games and also where Cosy Gaming will be going in the next years. So thank you very much again.
Thank you as well
for having us.